Ahmed Badr's story as a refugee started when a bomb tore through his family's home in Iraq. He was only 8 years old. Immediately after that happened, he and his family moved from Baghdad, Iraq, to Aleppo, Syria, and then to the coast of Syria in Jabala, and that's where they applied for refugee status. And the United States granted them refugee status, and they hopped on a plane to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Ahmed now lives in Connecticut, where he's an 18-year-old college student and the founder of Narratio, a platform for creative expression that seeks to create empathy and alleviate childhood illiteracy by empowering youth through the publishing of poetry, photography, art, and narrative. Ahmed is a talented published writer, a photographer, and a poet himself. And his work and his story have been featured all over the internet. You might have seen it on the Instagram blog or HuffPost or Adobe. It's all over the place. It's incredible. That's how I first found out about Ahmed. I was just reading an article and I was so drawn to this guy's story and his ability to communicate his story in order to create empathy and understanding. Ahmed has incredibly keen insight into the power of storytelling, and he speaks on how the power and beauty of personal storytelling is that it is not divisive. It's unassuming, and it has the power to change attitudes and narrow perspectives. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome to Sounds Good with Brandon Harvey. This is a weekly podcast where I sit down and host hopeful conversations with optimists and world changers about the unique experiences that drive them to use their influence for good. I absolutely love this conversation that Ahmed and I got to have about his story and his work and the impact that he wants to have on the world, and I think you're going to love it. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into the show. You've made a huge splash in your years. Tell me a little bit about Narratio and what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I think to tell you about Narratio, I'd have to start kind of from the beginning and tell you a little bit about my story, if that's okay. So I was born in Iraq in 1998, and I was there until 2006. So on July 25th, 2006, was the first night I spent away from home. I thought I was the coolest little kid, 8 years old. I thought, I'm independent now, so I get to stay away from home. So I stayed at my grandparents', and the next day my dad came to pick me up. And when you can just immediately tell that there's something off.
It's like an energy.
Yeah, it's an energy. It's a look. It's just a feeling. It's just there's something off that you immediately sense. But I didn't really want to say anything, so I just kind of just stayed silent. And then on our way home, I summoned up my courage and asked my dad. I'd asked him, Baba, what's wrong? And he took one of those, deep parental breaths, and he said, Ahmed, our house was bombed last night. And as a kid, you don't really know what that means, right? Your world is so limited. You eat, you play, you go to sleep, and you just kind of do that over and over again. So we got home, and I saw for myself what had happened. I saw the destruction. I saw, the path of the bomb. It entered through the bathroom window and pretty much split the house in half. And my parents and my little sister, who was 3 years old at the time, were in the house when it happened, and it missed the path of the bomb missed them by about 3 feet.
What?
On each side.
Wow!
And I didn't really understand this as a kid. I didn't know the gravity of everything, and maybe like 3-4 years afterwards, I realized that the bomb had entered through 3 natural gas canisters. Those old ones people use for cooking?
Yeah.
And it entered through each one. There's a hole, like a 2-foot hole through each one. And I didn't realize it until 3 or 4 years after that my dad had emptied them out a couple weeks before. So to think about, like, what if he hadn't done that? It's a crazy thought. And then I spend a lot of time thinking, what would have happened if I wasn't at my grandparents' home, and if I was home, where exactly would I be in relation to that experience?
Do you feel like that's all etched in your memory? Because I don't remember a ton from when I was 8 years old, but I can imagine that like that moment was so defining that it stuck with you. Do you kind of have like an actual tangible memory of it, or is some of it kind of more your parents telling you things?
I think it's very tangible. There's very few things.
Wow.
There are very few things that are as tangible as something like that.
Mm-hmm.
About 2-3 years ago now, I started writing about all of these things, and it turned into a memoir about my family's journey to America. And as you're trying to remember all these things, you almost have to play this game with yourself, and that, did this actually happen, or is my memory just playing games with me? But that's one of the things that is very, very, very vivid. And yeah, I don't know whether it has to deal with the severity of it, or the kind of the grand fashion in which it happened, but it's one of the things that are really, really, really vivid in my mind and in my memory.
Man. And obviously that kind of thing happening is going to alter the trajectory of your life. I would imagine that you didn't stay in your home that night. What did you guys do next?
So we started packing up our things, and about a week later, we moved to Syria. We moved to Aleppo, and we had cousins there. And at the time, Aleppo was much safer than it is now, sadly.
Yeah, most people are making the opposite migration right now.
Exactly. And my uncle had been living in Aleppo for a couple of years, so we moved in with him and his family, and we stayed in Aleppo for about a year. And during this year, I went back to school. I was in 3rd grade now, and I started learning English, a little bit of English. In Syria, you start learning English in 1st grade, whereas in Iraq, you start learning it in high school. And I really struggled. English was my worst class. I could not figure it out to save my life. And so after about a year in Aleppo, about 2-3 months in, we moved to our own place. We moved out of my uncle's. And I started going to school, and school was across the street, but it wasn't always across the street. Before, I always like to tell the story of that really exemplifies kind of my dad really showing me that I really can do whatever it is that I want, and that he would always be there to support me. And it was a story of every day in the first couple months when we lived at my uncle's, I would have to walk to school, right? And that road, or that trek to school went through a very, very busy market. So my dad always walked with me because he was, scared that I would get hurt, or it was a busy intersection, busy market. So he always walked with me to school. And every day I would ask him, I would petition, Dad, let me go alone. I need to do this alone. I'm, at the time, 9? Just turned 9. And I'm 9 now. I'm independent. I get to do whatever I want. I get to walk to school. And he every day he's like, nope, I won't let you do it. It's too dangerous. And then one day he just goes, all right, go ahead. And I had to kind of clean my ears. I was like, wait, what? Say that again. Are you sure? Are you just saying that with me? And he's like, no, go ahead. You're old now, right? You're 9 years old. Go for it. So I walk to school, and all is well. I come back, and I'm like, see, I did it alone. And he's like, okay, yeah, I mean, that's fair. And then fast forward 6-7 years later, I'm writing the memoir, and I write about that story, and I'm like, I thank my dad. I tell him, thank you for that. That in that moment, I realized that, I can do things on my own, even though, maybe you didn't think so at the time, but thank you for giving me that opportunity to be able to experience something alone, and to kind of build up that confidence. And he kind of just he just laughs. He goes, dude, I was behind you the whole time. and so I think our time in Aleppo is exemplified by experiences like that, where we really enjoyed our time there, and the people were absolutely incredible, and a lot of growth happened. So we stayed in Aleppo for a year, and then moved to the coast of Syria in a small town called Jable. And we stayed in Jable for another year. And it was during this time that we decided to apply for refugee status with the UN. So how that happened was we would go back and forth and visit Iraq and Syria just to visit family. And at the time, my parents were on paid leave. They were civil engineers in Iraq for 22 years. And this paid leave was running out, and they had to make a decision. They told them, if you don't come back to Iraq, this paid leave is going to end. We won't be able to continue paying you. And so they had to make that choice. Do we stay in Syria and be safe and struggle financially? At the time, Syrian economy wasn't the best. Or do we go back to Iraq, be okay financially, but risk that safety that Syria provided? So they had to make a decision. And then on one of these bus drives back to Baghdad, my dad was talking to a bus driver. And the driver told him about this UN program that would take, at the time, 1% of everyone that applied. And, my dad thought, we really don't have anything to lose. And he applied. About 6 months to a year later, we got a phone call. And they said, you have 4 one-way tickets to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so we moved to Sioux Falls and spent a year there. Then my parents went back to school, and we moved again to a small town in Sioux Falls. In South Dakota.
What was it like when you first got to Sioux Falls?
Very cold, man. It was absolutely incredible. Going into it, I had a very different perception of America. My only perception was from like action movies. And so, when my mom told me that we were moving to America and when we were in Jebla, I literally thought that America was just in a different neighborhood.
Really?
I thought it was just it's a cab drive away, but apparently it wasn't. It was a few thousand miles. But yeah, I think it took us four plane rides to finally get to the U.S. Or finally get to Sioux Falls. We went from Damascus to Budapest to New York City, and then New York City to Chicago, and then Chicago to South Dakota. And I think, I was first disappointed because not everyone looked like Bruce Willis. But, eventually got, it wasn't easy to adjust, but eventually, we stayed in South Dakota for about 4 years. And then we moved down to Houston, which is where my family lives now, in 2012. And it was here in Houston that I really started to begin to express this identity, this dual identity that was starting to form. It was a family friend that told me, hey, maybe you should start writing about these experiences, this experience of, being Iraqi, but also having this American side. And this duality really started to show itself. And I realized that by writing about it, it was something that was incredibly, incredibly empowering. And in sophomore year of high school, I started this small website called Mesopotamia, where I started putting up my poetry and my art and my photography. And then all of a sudden, people were messaging me about it. They're saying, "Oh my God, I like your poem. I like this picture. This is really good." And it was just an incredible, incredible experience. I didn't even think that was possible. And so with that in mind, I started writing more and more about my story, trying to find different ways to express it, just to understand myself. I was, ultimately on a very foundational level, it was an attempt to understand this duality that was almost contradictory at times.
Yeah, let's break that down a little bit more, because there really is a dichotomy between being an Iraqi and being an American, especially, I don't know, I feel like, I don't know specifically where the bomb that went through your house came from or anything, but there's something to be said for the fact that, American forces were in the United States. I'm sure that there was something at least related about that and you having to leave your home. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in a bigger scale, just the Iraq War is pretty much the reason that I'm here. And my family's here. Among others, it's not the main one, but it's just a lot to kind of unpack and try to understand, because, if it wasn't for that bomb, a lot of the things that ended up happening later on wouldn't have happened. So in a way, I recently wrote a poem from the perspective of the bomb. It was really interesting to try and do that, because I had to make sure that I personified the bomb in the best way that I wanted, and that I wasn't, cutting it any slack. But also, there was this feeling of not justification, but this feeling that it's just, I can send it to you. It's just it's a very tough thing to write, because I wanted to make sure that I got it right, and that I wasn't giving the bomb a way out. But I think the main thing that I got out of it was that, as weird as it sounds, I appreciate the bomb now. Like, I realize now how that it's given me a gift, and it's given me a calling, and that calling is to provide space for people of my experience, and people with experiences different than mine, to share their stories. And that's kind of how Narratio was born. Narratio was born out of this realization that, okay, well, here's a small website that was interesting and that was fun, but that was just for myself. So why don't I take that and then turn it into something that can benefit other people, and that allows other people to express themselves all over the world? So with that, that's kind of how Narratio was born. So it's now 2 years old or so. We started it in January of my junior year of high school, and since then, it's grown quite a bit, and it's continuing to grow. We've published a little over 60 posts now from 13 countries, and we were featured on Instagram in September. And since then, we submissions have really, really shot up, and we're trying to find a way to scale up right now. So basically, what Narratio is, it's an online platform for youth empowerment through creative expression. So what we do is we publish poetry, art, photography, and stories of youth from all over the world, and then turn those published submissions into booklets. And we use these booklets in storytelling workshops across the United States. So that's the basic idea behind it.
And what's the what has it been like for you taking on this project? What has been the transformational power of creating this and bringing other people into this for you specifically?
I think it's been incredibly empowering for myself, and incredibly validating as well. I think ultimately I am appreciative, and extremely appreciative and grateful to all the attention that my story has gotten, but I don't want that attention to just start and end and just exist as something, oh, well, here's this guy, he has the story, okay, listen to his story, and that's it. I don't want it to end that way. I want people to hear my story and be encouraged to tell their own. I don't, no matter how fun and no matter how much I like the attention, I don't want it to just exist as that. Like, I don't want it to just stand alone. I want it to be able to connect with people in a very deep way. And I think Narratio does a great job of that, in that it's just a space for people to create and to express themselves in whichever way they feel is needed. And in my experience, that's been something that's helped me understand my identity and my identities. And it's helped me understand myself and definitely those around me. So I think the project is very much it's a testament to the power of storytelling in my life, and the power of storytelling across the world.
What kind of person is sharing their story on Narratio, or maybe more so, what do you want it to be used for? Like, who do you want it to be used for?
I think I don't want to restrict that by saying, oh, the type of person that should submit to Narratio is, young and has a story to tell, who has overcome struggle. I don't want it to restrict it to that. But ultimately, I think, I want it to be a space that kind of curates itself, if that makes sense. And it's doing that already. I think a lot of our submissions are from youth that, really haven't had the space to tell their story and to express themselves. So we have, poems about identity. One of the poems up on the site right now is called Palm Trees and Jordan Almonds. It is written by this incredible poet that lives in Houston. Her name is May Al-Amari, and she does an amazing job of kind of trying to dissect her dual identities. So you have something like that, and then you have photography submissions from India that showcase the beauty of different exhibitions and different stories from the artist's own specific culture. And then we have Marcelo Villaseñor, who takes pictures and makes drawings on top of them, in order to kind of express himself in his own way. So you have this community that it's united by its differences as much as it is by its similarities. And I think that's the beauty of the whole project, and that's the beauty of the work that I hope to do and that I hope to continue doing.
I read this quote from you where you said, "I realized that by telling individuals about my past experiences, my culture, and what I stood for, I paved the way for the destruction of stereotypes, flawed perspectives, and hateful attitudes." Tell me about learning the power of storytelling.
I think it started in middle school where, this is in South Dakota, where I had, friends coming up to me and maybe making jokes that, related to the Iraqi experience or the Muslim experience in America. And they would ask questions like just ridiculous stuff like, "Oh, is Osama bin Laden your cousin?" And, when you hear these questions and others, it's very easy to get angry. It's very easy to denounce, and it's very easy to really fight back and be defensive. And, there is a place and time for that. But I realized that for me, if I answered those questions with understanding, and if I answered those questions in a way that was conducive to mutual understanding and cooperation, then those attitudes will end up shifting. I think the beauty of telling that story and just telling your story is that it's very unassuming, and no one's going to come in and say, "Hey, your story is invalid." And I think the beauty of stories, especially personal ones, is that it's very hard for a personal story to be divisive, I think. Like someone just sharing their own experiences, and I realized in middle school that just by befriending the people that may be ignorant of my culture, just that simple act of existing in their presence was shifting their attitudes. And it can be a thing that's as direct as it can be indirect. And I realized that over time, these attitudes were shifting simply because I was just being myself around these people. I wasn't, preaching around school saying, "Hey, this is who I am and this is who you think I should be." It was just me existing and just being a normal student and a normal human being. And that really was, conducive to that mutual understanding and to that cooperation.
When do you feel like you realized that other people were interested in your story? I would imagine, did you feel guarded at one point and then you had a moment where you're like, "Oh, people are curious"?
I think it was right when I started writing the memoir, because before that, I didn't really think that my story was any different from anyone else. And then the family friend that told me, "Hey, maybe you should start writing about this." Then I started realizing that this story has the power to really change attitudes, and it has the power to change attitudes again because it's not assuming anything, because it's not divisive. It's simply offering a perspective. And offering something different. So I think definitely after sophomore summer, I was invited to this journalism conference in Washington. It was the first time that I was really traveling out of state. That wasn't, obviously moving from South Dakota to Houston. And being in Washington for that, I think it was like 5-6 days, really just opened my mind to the world of possibilities that existed. And I realized, I remember I went all out. I got business cards for Mesopotamia. I got, I was ready. And then, being surrounded by so many incredible people and hearing, leading journalists share their stories and share about, how they got to where they are now. I thought, why not me? Why can't I do that too? Armed with that attitude and that perspective, I realized, maybe there's something here, and it's another part of it is this incredible sense of responsibility that I feel I have towards Iraq and its people. Iraq has 36 million people. 18 million of those are under 19. So that's a huge demographic that I think is incredibly disenfranchised at the moment. And I feel like with my experience and the opportunities I've been offered, it's an incredible responsibility that I feel that I need to represent, so to say, for the people that don't have the opportunity to tell their stories until hopefully I can give them the opportunity to do that.
What do you think that the future is for those millions and millions of like young Iraqis? Like what's your hope for the future, based off of what you're doing, but also, what you've seen and what you've experienced and what you know to be true?
Well, I think right now the future doesn't seem too bright because there's the education system in Iraq has really, really, really struggled since the war. And so you have this incredible demographic that is ready to do so many amazing things, but they're not given the opportunities, whether it's, the government or different, systems of power that are in place that are not conducive to growth in any way. I think, for the work that I hope to do, I really hope to take Narratio to Iraq and take it to kind of a global scale more than it is now, and try to empower that demographic through the power of storytelling and through the power of creative expression. This summer, I'll be working for the UN Migration Agency in New York, hosting a podcast, and I'm really, really excited. I'll be collecting youth refugee stories across the U.S. and across the world, and I think that's a great first step to the empowerment of that demographic. And I hope that over time I can just figure out a more effective way of doing it. But I think I really, really, really want to play a part in shaping that future and making sure that it's a positive one, and just doing all I can to provide the opportunities that I've been provided to the people that I represent, and the people that I look up to, and the people that may not have the same opportunities that I was afforded.
I think that's really beautiful, because I would imagine that there's a lot of people who they have an opportunity to move as a young child, and they just jump into their new location, and I think it'd be easy to forget about where you came from and just, focus on living your life now. But you're saying, hey, I want to bridge this gap. I want to be a part of where I came from and bring people through a similar experience to what I went through.
Exactly.
Man, tell me about your growth as an artist through the years, like as a writer and as a poet. How have you felt like you've just been growing creatively?
Well, I think I'm happy to announce that I'm better at English than I was in Syria. I think it's been really interesting. It's been really, I think, through Narratio and through specifically my photography, I think, and my writing from high school to now, I think, especially sophomore year of high school to now, I think my writing has grown more and more sophisticated, and it still has a long way to go. But I think as the urgency for my story to be heard increased, the more I felt that I needed to improve my skills. And I think that comes with, again, I just want to put myself in the best possible position to express myself in any given moment, whether that be, in conversations with people that may not agree with, what I'm doing or what I stand for, to, simply capturing an image that speaks to people. So, after being featured on Instagram, there comes it's very easy to become complacent, I think, after certain things. And I really want to make sure that I stay true to everything that I'm doing, no matter how much success comes my way or no matter how much success doesn't come my way. And I think my art is going to continue growing as I find different ways of telling my story. I don't want my work to be focused on my story. It's definitely an important part of it. But I think ultimately, I really, really want to change what people think about when they hear the word refugee. And I think with my art, I really hope to do that on a very personal level. I think what's wrong right now with the word, or not with the word, but with the label, is that when you think of the word refugee, you think of people fleeing war, and you think of blood and violence, and I think that's an important part of the narrative, but that's not all of it. And that's usually where the story ends, or where it starts and where it ends. And I really, really want to change that through my work with Narratio and through my own personal expression.
Just a minute ago, you said that you want to create this art despite the people who don't agree with what you're doing or what you stand for. And it in so many ways, it surprises me that people would not agree with what you're doing once they get to know you. And I feel like there's like this weird gap between people thinking that they disagree with you, because they're predisposed to, whatever it is. But like you said earlier, it's so interesting because I think people have a hard time disagreeing with your story, Once they get to know you, the disagreement, it seems like that goes out the window. Is that ultimately the goal, is for people to kind of have their preconceptions challenged enough times by stories and, stories on Narratio or wherever else that maybe their preconceptions were wrong? Is that kind of the direction that you're pushing?
I think so. I think you captured it beautifully. I think the unassuming nature of stories is so, so powerful. I hope that, through Narratio and through the sharing of stories, that those perceptions and those preconceptions are at the very least challenged. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think it's very hard to invalidate or denounce or disagree with someone's personal experiences and someone's story.
Do you feel like, at least in the United States and maybe globally, people are living in an empathy deficit more than ever? Or is it just that the empathy deficit is directed towards refugees and people from the Middle East?
I don't think it's the empathy deficit isn't unique to Middle Eastern people or the or refugees. I think it is very much a universal thing, but I really don't think there is an empathy deficit per se. I think the world is just trying to keep up with the incredible amount of things that are happening all at once. And I think sometimes when we hear about different statements that are made by certain people, whether it's someone saying something that may be problematic or racist or whatever, I think it's oftentimes very easy to denounce those statements and just move on, but it's much harder to kind of dig beneath those statements and try to really understand where the other person's coming from. And I think inherently every single human being has that ability to empathize with someone and try to understand where they're coming from. I think it's just a matter of activating that empathy in the right way, and in a way that it's not divisive. So I think that, and I don't think it's so much of a deficit as something that is already existing, but that just needs to be activated a bit more.
Tell me about like your long-term plans. Where do you think that you're going to be in, not too long-term because nobody knows that kind of thing, but like in 10 years, where do you kind of see yourself?
Man, I have no idea.
That's the best answer.
I think, I'm going to continue to do, well, at least I hope to continue to do work that is related to storytelling and continue to tell the stories that are oftentimes ignored. And, in 10 years, who knows? I really ultimately want to be the voice for youth refugees and just refugees in general. In whichever way that becomes possible, I'm open to. There isn't something specific in mind. My parents ask me this question every time we have a phone call. But, I think it's not something specific, but I definitely want to work in the realm of human connection in some way, shape, or form. And, I hope that whatever role I'm in or whatever job I'm working within really fulfills my need to empower myself and those around me.
Man, that is absolutely beautiful. Ahmed, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your story and using it as a tool to empower others. I'm so excited to see what continues to happen.
Oh, no, thank you very much, Brandon. I really appreciate it.
Man, I loved getting to talk with Ahmed a lot because I'm a huge fan of the way that Ahmed is using his story and his experience and his incredible passions and talents for photography and writing and poetry to make a difference in the world, to create empathy, to create conversation, and to fight division. After the show, he and I talked for a little bit, and I just became even more impressed with the work that he's doing and the way that he's leveraging the opportunities that are coming his way. Like when Instagram did a big post about him, it drove a lot of attention to what he was doing, and he was able to bring people into the fold. He was able to bring people into the storytelling process. And I like that he didn't just kind of absorb all of that himself, but he kind of used that power and that platform he was given to give a platform to more people, to give a platform to other people. I think that that's really cool, and I'm so excited to see what Ahmed does next, what his next kind of big adventures are, and the ways that he continues to share stories. I loved this quote from him where he said, "I realized that by telling individuals my past experiences, my culture, and what I stood for, I paved the way for the destruction of stereotypes, flawed perspectives, and hateful attitudes." What an incredible thing. If you want to connect with Ahmed and follow along with what he's doing, and if you want to learn more about Narratio and read some incredible stories and see some of the incredible stories that are being shared on that platform, you should absolutely check it out. You can search for Ahmed Badr on Instagram and Twitter, and you can visit narratio.org, narratio.org, and really dive into the stories that are on that site. If you liked this episode, if you really connected with it, please share it with a friend. And if you like the show, if you've been listening for a while now and you haven't yet, go and leave the show a review on iTunes. It really helps people find the show. It's really fun to read your comments, what you have to say. We love it. Go ahead and do it. If you're looking for more good news throughout the week, and if you just want to get to know us a little bit more, you can check us out at goodgoodgood.co, and we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at goodgoodgoodco. I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go out and do some good this week, and we'll be back next week with another inspiring conversation with an incredible person. Sound good?